Hi everyone, or maybe just future Matt. I just wanted to record some of my thoughts before I forget them. It's kind of a lot for writing. So I'm back to reading a little bit of Emily Dickinson out of Helen Vendler, which I think before I ordered this book when I was in Paris because I went to this reading at, I think, that famous English bookshop in Paris. And someone had told me, or had said out loud, like, you haven't read Dickinson until you've read her through Vendler. And I was like, oh, okay, I believed them. I mean, weirdly, now that I think about it, when I was in college in Philadelphia, we wanted to go to Paris, but we couldn't get a ticket for spring break, and so we asked our teachers for permission to leave, and my professor, Dr. Bancroft, was like, yeah, but I don't know, maybe she was like, oh, you have to read a book or something like that, I don't know. And so I chose a biography of Emily Dickinson, and I would read it all the time. I'd go to the cafeteria and just read it by myself, and I would joke that I was on a date with Emily. And then I think I learned how queer Emily is. Is that what came next? Probably. And then cracked open this book, and it's just really weird. It can be really insightful, sort of, but then and comes so close to talking about queer issues. But then just not mentioning it. I think here I accuse maybe Vendler of having a lack of queer imagination. And a lot of times Vendler will connect things that I find queer. She connects them straight to the Bible, or doesn't go beyond that. I think Emily did, in her house, she had a Bible and a dictionary as books. And she read Leaves of Grass. Yeah, she read other things too. They subscribed to literary journals, the Dickinsons did. She writes in the introduction, the Dickinson household received literary magazines of the day, and it was in one of those, the Atlantic Monthly, of April 1862, that Dickinson read an article entitled Letter to a Young Contributor, written by Thomas Wentworth Higginson, desperate for a literary eye to look at her poems. So I gotta get my receipts. And I will, and that's why I'm trying to put this down in a video. At this point, she had a very committed literary eye in Sue. her sister-in-law, who was like highly literary and read all of her poems. Like, I think that's like undeniable. What I think people try to deny is that they were also lovers. But anyway, desperate for a literary eye to look at her poems, the 32-year-old Dickinson, representing herself as younger in the art of poetry than she actually was, wrote a letter unsigned to Higginson, asking him to tell her whether her poetry breathed. She enclosed 4 poems on separate sheets of paper and added in a small envelope her calling card. This brave act began her most important literary correspondence. Which, like, she definitely wrote notes to Sue all the time. And they had like a little runner that would run between their house and deliver the notes. Which I think is highlighted in the movie called, I don't know what it's called, Emily. Dickinson later told Higginson he had saved her life by responding to her plea. I'd like to see where that is written. I think I have PDFs of her letters somewhere. Anyway, this poem, stupid camera. Really hit a nerve for me. A weight with needles on the pounds, to push and pierce besides, that if the flesh resist the heft, the puncture coolly tries, that not a pore be overlooked of all this compound frame, as manifold for anguish, as species be for name. A weight with needles on the pounds to push, and pierce besides, that if the flesh resist the heft, the puncture coolly tries, that not a pore be overlooked of all this compound frame, as manifold for anguish, as species be for name. In this riddle poem depicting anguish, we are in the torture chamber of some inquisitor. I mean, like, nice work, Helen, but like, what does an inquisitor do? They're like trying to weed out your heresy. Who's decided that the usual instruments of torment are not adequate. He has therefore invented a new one. It is a weight, like those used to press to death martyrs, such as the English Margaret Clitheroe, commemorated by Hopkins. But this weight has needles on its lower surface, the part that will come into contact with the victim's flesh. There are so many needles that they will pierce every pore on the sufferer's skin. The weight applies its push, but if its victims resist, the weight in addition coolly tries puncture. Like, you can see, she's like, kind of erotic here. Come into contact with the victim's flesh. I think she says orifices later. Ascribing agency to the weight itself as it proceeds from the torture of heft to the torture of puncture, Dickinson also inscribes intention. The weight has invented its needle piercing in order that not a pore be overlooked. Such devilish intentionality. Is this devilish or these inquisitors, which I guess now we're all agreed that the inquisitors were wrong, but are we? So minutely pursuing its violence, scanning the body to find its smallest orifices, suggests madness in the agent who invented the needle pounds of the weight. So she's saying the agent, and later she's gonna say that the agent is God, I'm pretty sure. The compound frame that is being tortured is that uneasy combination of body and soul that we call a self. I think, yes, this is a battle against one's own body, like especially when your body wants the wrong bodies, right? This like heresy of homosexuality. But she doesn't really go anywhere with that. Although the torture is applied to the flesh, the pores of the body, its ultimate aim is to puncture with anguish the similarly porous surface of the soul. Yes. I think this struggle is physical. And I hate to use the word, but spiritual. Why did she say soul and not spirit? There's no more powerful word than anguish in Dickinson's lexicon. Interesting. She uses it 32 times in her poems to describe excruciating physical or mental pain. It's funny that she's using excruciating here, because that means pain of the cross. And now she said physical or mental. She's moved from the soul to the mind. Speaking of the agony in the garden, in Proud of My Broken Heart, Dickinson refers to the strong cup of anguish brewed for the Nazarene. Agency is omitted in that passage, as in a weight, but we know that it is God who brewed that anguish, since Jesus prayed, "O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." I mean, this is pray the gay away. At least for me, I feel like I probably prayed that. Like, I felt like, yeah, Jesus was tortured too. If only I could just not be tortured by these homosexual desires. Why does my camera keep sinking? Dickinson has conceived her imaginary torture instrument to describe what she feels is being done to her by some superhuman external force. Is it God or not God? She's done nothing to deserve the imposition of such extremity. Like, what a funny statement. Biblically, she has, right? Like, all have sinned. Everyone falls short. She uses this word like imposition too. It's like imposed on her. So is it the Inquisitor? These like arbiters of God's will, or is it God themselves? Driven to explanation, she says that the self has many pores through which to feel anguish. As what? or as what? As Adam had names for all created species. See, that I think is very insightful. This is so scientific. I don't know that I'd ever bring it back to Adam, which of course is like, yeah, Adam and Eve, right? The first supposedly heterosexual couple. As Adam had names for all created species, language is the greatest manifold in the poet's symbolic system. Like, I want to say so much about names, right? Like, a thing can't exist until it's named, but maybe it also can't be, like, legislated. She associated anguish with the lost paradise, writing in Better Than Music of how in adulthood the story of Eden becomes a legend, dimly told, Eve and the anguish, Grandam's story. The slide from the oppression of anguish to a prelapsarian joy before the fall. Adam's naming of all the animals makes the end of a weight with needles on the pounds a shock. Genesis offers as one of the images of plenitude associated with the creation God's invitation to Adam. And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air and brought them into Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave names to all the cattle and to the fowl of the air and to every beast of the field. Such a long quote. We already know that. Why? The majestic linguistic power nascent in Adam. So here again, like it's like second wave feminism or something, right? Like, oh, look how great this is that Dickinson is like sort of becoming this Adam, a namer, this man, and also here that Higginson, this like man, saves her life. And then let alone like, ignoring queerness, which I think I will get to in a minute. The majestic linguistic power nascent in Adam interests even God. He brought the creatures to Adam to see what he would call them. What could be more manifold than Adam's linguistic invention? Finding for every living species a name. And then it says, Dickinson must have found reassurance in the biblical verses. Where's that in the poem? Like, where's the evidence for that? She doesn't, I don't feel a comfort here at all. Or reassurance. Dickinson must have found reassurance in the biblical verses. God takes an interest in human linguistic creation, which must include her own. It's like a sermon. I don't get it. I don't get it. What am I missing about Vendler? That's a good question. So she's got all this Bible, right? And then at the same time, she defies Genesis. Which, yes, these two things can be going on at the same time, and probably are. Like I think this is about this struggle with the flesh and the Bible. But it only gets one sentence here. And we just quoted like this long passage from the Bible. At the same time, she defies Genesis by adopting a modern scientific word, species, for living beings. The thing is that, you know, like the Bible, the King James Version, like I think, yeah, it uses the word homosexual, which like is a modern invention. And there's lots written about the 6 times the Bible mentions homosexuality and how it has little to no reflection on how we see it today. But the modern world also has its own system of words which do the same thing, you know, like gay and straight, gay and lesbian. Which I think becomes its own sort of thing to struggle against. And then she says, in rhyming the human frame with a name, the poet reiterates the power of language. Sure. I mean, so for me, this poem is much more I mean, am I reading my own experience into it? Probably. But I feel like this poem is about the anguish that many queer people go through. And here I'm saying queer as this like large umbrella. What do we think of like our transgender siblings, like naming and pronouns and the horrible names that we assign people and how we legislate who they are in really strange, like bathroom bills kind of ways. And if gay people struggle with their own flesh, like their own bodily attraction. Oh, I learned the word for this. I don't mean physical attraction. I think I mean like sexual attraction. I can't remember. I've got to look up that, but their bodies. I think that transgender people, even more, are struggling with this battle of like body and external abstractions put upon them. A wheat with needles on the pounds to push and pierce besides, that if the flesh resists the heft, the puncture coolly tries. It's so rhymey when you read it out loud. I think it's hard to like get into it almost. It's so musical. A weight with needles on the pounds to push and pierce besides, that if the flesh resists the heft, the puncture coolly tries, that not a pore be overlooked of all this compound frame. Is the compound frame the torture device? Or the body? Vendler definitely thinks it's the body. What is this of doing here? That not a pore be overlooked by all this compound frame? That not a pore be overlooked of all this compound frame? Overlooked of? A weight with needles on the pounds to push and pierce besides. A weight with needles on the pounds to push and pierce besides, that if the flesh resists the heft, the puncture coolly tries, that not a pore be overlooked of all this compound frame, as manifold for anguish as species be for name. I don't know what this is. Is this an article? What the hell is this? But I wanted to share it, get it out, because I have to go to work soon. Actually, I'm going to therapy first. Woohoo. Thanks to whoever's listening to this.